Why do you think performance has been so stagnant over the past 40 years?
I think people are doing the same things. I think when you don't change anything over a really long period of time, and really the things that have changed have gone the wrong direction. They used to train more often, higher frequency of training, and slightly longer, and then that backed off. I think a big part of that was the 80s. The advent of interval training, which a guy wrote a couple books about it in the 80s, and it caught fire, and people thought they were going to be the next superstar in horse training, and then they end up hurting a lot of horses, and that I think set the industry back a lot, because all of a sudden it scared enough people into just being like, we got to protect these horses. They're so fragile. It's so risky doing anything with them. And that now has passed on to the next generation and the next generation of trainers, where, I don't think they're necessarily right. And, but they're still feeding off of an era where a lot of injuries came out of change. Something new caused a lot of injuries, and that scared people.
I was looking at charts of Kentucky Derby winners, and the 1950 Kentucky Derby winner was actually 2 seconds faster than the 2017 Derby winner.
And
how is that?
You can attribute some of that to the track, the surface. I mean,
Right.
if the surface can be sped up a lot, if you let it harden, it'll be much quicker. But they've prepared those surfaces similar for a long time. But also, if you look back at like some of the first real successful horses, War Admiral is a really old horse, and he was working. He was racing 5 times in a month sometimes as a 2-year-old, and some of the older horses were pulling wagons in between. They'd pull a carriage, and then they'd race on the weekends. So they're working all week pulling a wagon, and then going and racing every weekend. So, the concept that these horses are that fragile or that we should do less with them is really problematic for me. I just don't. The evidence does not support that.
You said, quote, most horsemen don't even have a high school level understanding of sports science as it relates to horses. Why?
Well, sports science is a fairly new concept and study. I mean, when you looked at the smartest scientists and sports science people in the country in the 50s, when Roger Bannister was trying to break the 4-minute mile. I mean, the smartest scientists in the country were like, no, it's not humanly possible. It's the same in horse racing. It's a lot of these guys they're unbelievable knowledgeable about horses, but in an area from a practical standpoint. They know this is the way the horse is, and when it gets hurt, here's what happens, here's what I need to feed it, and they know more about a horse in that way than anybody on the planet. But they don't know physiologically what feeding a horse sweet feed does to their hindgut. They don't understand about biology of the inside of a horse, or necessarily the process of building musculature, what the supercompensation curve is from a work. They just don't. They know maybe what it looks like, and they know how to do things from an outside standpoint, but they're not educated in terms of a formal education. And that's just because there's not a class that does that. Not a lot of the trainers out there went to college for horse biology or equine science.
So why are injury rates so astronomically high?
I think it's a lot of different things. It's a lot of factors that all contribute, but the main one is that we're asking the horses to do more in terms of longer distance and higher speed in their races than we train them to do. So the short version is that the training system we have now doesn't adequately prepare the horses for what they're doing. And the system we use to do that, to inadequately prepare them, is really risky. It's standing a horse more or less in a stall for 23 hours a day, taking them out, riding them fast for a very short period of time, and putting them back in the stall. From a physiological standpoint, that's a really bad plan. The warm-up isn't adequate. There's not a pattern that they can fall into that gets them ready for that. There's long periods of nothing, followed by very short periods of super extreme, and that's just a recipe for injuries.
And that's continues to be done because that's just how it's always been done.
And logistically, managing horses isn't that easy.
Right.
I mean, you can't horses are herd animals, so you could turn 50 of them out in a 200-acre field, let them run around as a huge group, go out there, get one or two of them, take them in, train, and race. And I, it's hard for me to make an argument, or hard for me to believe that wouldn't provide a better environment for producing racehorses than what we're doing now. But I might be wrong. Boxing them up and caging them, while it's a little bit inhumane in a way and provides a lot of opportunity for injuries, might be also bottling up their energy to some degree, like shaking a soda can and then opening it. And when you open it in a race, they're absolutely going 100%. But there's a lot of gaps in that theory that to me make it unlikely to be true. I think that they're designed to outrun predators. That's why they evolved the way they did. And when you're designed to outrun predators, you're designed to be aware and ready to run all the time, and sometimes multiple times in a day. And you do that by living in a big herd. There's somewhat safety in numbers. And then when there's a predator, you haul ass until you outrun it, or the slowest one gets eaten. And it's a natural selection of fast horses, fast animals.
Tell about the GPS that you'll put on your riders.
Mm-hmm. They're doing it in a lot of other places as well, where they have these saddle girths that go around underneath the saddle, and they have heart rate monitor on them, and GPS, and a force meter, what do you call it, gyroscope, and an accelerometer, and they'll be able to tell how fast a horse goes, stride length, stride frequency, and heart rate. And I think that'll be a useful tool to help bridge that gap between the trainer, what we want the riders to do when they're on the horse, and what actually happens out on the track, because there's a big gap in that right now.
What's the Lark Test app?
The Lark Test guys, they created an app and a system for testing lactic acid primarily, but there's several other tests that you can kind of go with that from. But the idea is to be able to, from a fixed workload like on the treadmill, be able to see physiologically what your horse is doing, how hard it had to work. If it's kind of a simple version of it, more simple than what we traditionally did in the human world, but I think it hits the markers that you'd really want to know about.